Politics Today. An eye for what's at stake in global politics and your source for the social, economic, and political impact of public policy on the African American community. Your host, Kelly Michael Williams, is a political strategy veteran with an undefeated campaign record and the political experience that spans nearly 3 decades, from Mayor Willie Brown in California to President Barack Obama in our nation's capital. So get ready for a fresh and honest approach on the politics that affect you and your family the most. Now, your host, Kelly Michael Williams.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Kelly Michael Williams. I want to thank you all for joining us once again tonight as we embark on another insightful and informative show, talking to you about the things that are affecting you the most here in the African American community. As we do with every show, before we get started, I pause and thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for allowing me to host this show and giving me this platform to be able to come before you each and every week and talk about the social, the economic, and the political impact of the issues affecting the African American community. And Black Politics Today, we seek to understand what's at stake in global politics. And our slogan is even more so relevant today and over the past 2 weeks. As the world looks onto the French city of Paris and its neighboring Belgium in the wake of the terrorist attacks of 2 weeks ago, the nation is braced for yet another 9/11 crisis. Americans, French, English, Dutch, German, and even Muslims are afraid of what could happen next. Our American military is spread out across the globe in various parts of the world. Just 1 year ago, we pulled out all of our combat units out of Afghanistan and Iraq, something that most Americans wanted to have after 14 years of fighting. Over 3,000 soldiers killed and nearly $22 billion spent. But now, in the midst of the presidential politics, a majority of the nation wants to put ground troops back on the ground in Syria and Iraq. That same majority is not satisfied with the president's response to the latest attacks and the continuing Syrian civil war currently taking place, with ISIS taking claim to a majority of territories in that region. My guest tonight to help us understand the ISIS movement is Ambassador Suzan Johnson Cook. She is a presidential advisor, pastor, theologian, author, activist, and academic who served as the United States Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. Also, Ambassador Suzan served as under former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton and President Obama. She is currently the host of her own web program on YouTube called Conversations with Ambassador Suzan Cook, and she is the candidate for the 13th Congressional District of New York, seeking to fill the open seat left behind by retiring Congressman Charlie Rangel. Also joining me in studio is Dr. Wilmer Leon, former professor of Howard University, author and expert in the field of Black politics, American government, and public policy, nationally syndicated radio talk and TV host with his own political talk show on XM Sirius Radio, satellite radio, called Inside the Issues with Dr. Wilmer Leon, that broadcasts live on the Power, channel 169. And last but not least is another good friend of Black Politics Today, is retired Lieutenant Colonel Warren Christopher. He's a 24-year veteran. Colonel Christopher served in the U.S. Army. He's a single dad of 2 successful daughters, a former Chief of Staff at the Department of Interior, Senior Policy Advisor at the Department of Homeland Security, Commanding Officer in both Europe and Asia, Executive Officer in the Army Chief and the U.S. Senate Legislative Liaison Division, a Joint Staff Fellow, having served as a military aide to Senators Reid, Clinton, and Nelson. Most recently, Colonel Christopher is the Democratic candidate, one of the Democratic candidates for Maryland's 4th Congressional District. He is seeking to fill the seat vacated by Congresswoman Donna Edwards, who is now currently running for Senate. So please welcome them to the show. Welcome to the show, fellas.
Thank you.
Colonel Christopher, talk to us about that, because you're in the ground, you've been out there, you've led troops, you've been in combat, successfully brought every one of your teams home, and I want to commend you on that. Talk to us about that, because she is talking about an ideology, and it is something that where we hear most Muslims say that, well, that's not what we believe, that's not what our faith is telling us, just go out here, bomb, kill, and take over. Talk to us about that. What have you seen and what have you experienced on the ground and how that's going to impact what we do or how we compete or combat this series of terror regime.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm so pleased to be, John, joined by the good professor here again, and of course Kelly, and of course Dr. Sujay. I think it's really important for us to clearly highlight that it is not necessarily all Muslims in the Middle East. You know, I think it's important for us to go back and take a look at how did we get here, and it is because of destabilization between the Shiites and the Sunnis, and that of course is religious based because of the Prophet Muhammad. And so because of that destabilization between the Sunnis and the Shias, then you had this faction to come out of it known as the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or we know as ISIS or ISIL. And so because of those things, you have these factions that absolutely, not just here in America, but in the West period, that doesn't appreciate, you know, the freedoms that we enjoy in the West, and that is aimed at, you know, destroying, you know, our America and its allies. And so it's about an ideology. I absolutely believe that, but I also think that it is about, you know, really trying in every way to rain terror on the people that know freedom. And so, and then to exploit, whether it is through the banking system, through the oil industry, or through, you know, exploitation with the people there on the ground. It's really, you know, taking advantage of a destabilized area already, and to say let's exploit this destabilized area for what we can.
And you just came back, Dr. Wilmer, from Iran. And so there's also the issue with Iran, although you know, a lot of it focuses on Iraq, but there's a lot going on in Iran as well. And you just came back from there. Talk to us about what you saw and experienced and saw going on there, and how that may correlate or relate to what's happening. Because I understand that a lot of times they're saying that there's factions in Iran that are moving over into Iraq, or vice versa, factions in Iraq moving over to Iran. What's happening?
Well, first of all, it was a fantastic trip. Iran is a beautiful, beautiful country, beautiful people, fantastic food. Most of the stereotypes that we know and have come to accept here are totally false.
That's what I wanted to ask you that too. I wanted to find out, you know, because I know when I went to Africa, Africa was not what America would tell you Africa is.
Right.
Everybody needs to go to Africa.
Right.
And so I wanted to ask you that. What was the atmosphere like? What were the things that the American media is telling us about Iran and Iraq, or in this case Iran, that we should really know about what's happening over there?
Well, the first thing is that most people that I told that I was going over there told me I was crazy because I was going to get kidnapped, and then once I got kidnapped, my head was going to get cut off. Or my head was going to get cut off, then I was going to get kidnapped. That's one of the safest places you can be.
Really?
Oh my gosh, yes.
So, I mean, not to cut you off, because I know I wanted to, but one of the thoughts I had was, I mean, are we still considered liberators? I mean, are we liberators over there? Did we liberate Iran?
No,
Okay.
no, and we never were considered liberators.
Okay.
In 1953, the United States government, through the machinations of Kermit Roosevelt and Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., overthrew the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and installed the Shah upon the people of Iran. We didn't liberate them. We actually imposed a dictator upon them, which they were eventually, through the teachings of the Ayatollah Khomeini, able to put together a bloodless revolution, overthrow the Shah, and install their own government. So no, they do not see us as liberators. In fact, it is illegal for an American or a Brit to walk the streets of Iran without a Iranian escort. And that can be anybody who is Iranian. Okay. They just want to be sure that we're not trying to engage in any more foolishness that we've been engaged in their country in the past.
Wow. So when you look at that and talk about that from a military perspective, what's happening militarily over there, and is there an impact where ISIS has a safe haven there that they are starting to develop?
Well, Iran is primarily a Shiite Muslim country, and getting back to Colonel Christopher's point about the Sunni-Shia divide, they are about as anti-ISIS as anyone could possibly be. And particularly, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they are Shiite. They are as humble, and all they want to do is be better human beings. And they try every day in every way possible to be better human beings. And they'll tell you in a split second that those that are engaged in the ISIL ideology are not Muslim. In fact, from taking away from them this idea of radicalized Islam,
right.
I say radicalized Islam is an oxymoron used by morons. Because if you understand Islam, you would understand that those two concepts are diametrically opposed.
It seems like that America, I remember that when the president came into office and when he was running, it was like, we cannot police the world. We cannot do that. President Bush said that, we cannot police and be the caretaker for the world. But Leon Panetta comes out and says that we're supposed to be doing that. That's what we have to do. And was very critical of the president. Very critical of the president. Critical of his leadership. Critical of what he felt the plan should be. And I have a two-part question for you, because one, this isn't the first time he's done it. But it seems to me that him being a former CIA director, and I think Department of Defense director as well, coming out to criticize a sitting president, a Democratic president, a member of his own party, and criticize him on his handling of an international or a military international military act, where part of that could fall on Senator Clinton, as when she was his Secretary of State, and what she would have to do, especially during this Benghazi whole debacle. So the first part of it is like, how do you, what is the whole strategy? Because I remember correctly, the president, when Syria used their gas, the president said he was going to draw the line, he was going to go in, but Congress wouldn't give him the authority. That's the way I remember it. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the way I remember it. What is going to be the solution in terms of how you deal with someone criticizing the president, sitting there, and then isn't there going to be some backlash with that, with Hillary Clinton?
Well, there would normally be backlash, but criticizing the African American president is the game.
And I was going to go there too.
Is the game, but I have to take issue. We can't just sit back and trust the president and his judgment, because the president went in and backed the play to assassinate Muammar Gaddafi. And so a big part of the problem we're having right now is a lot of the ISIS fighters. Gaddafi warned us, you go mess with those people in the north and you're going to have a fight on your hands, the likes of which you've never seen. John McCain goes into Libya, comes back and says, we have to back the rebels in Libya. And they said, well, Senator, who are the rebels? He says, I don't know, but we have to back them. And now look at what we've got. So just saying that we have to support the president, wrong answer. Looking at, because we have to understand where ISIS came from. And a lot of, yes, it is an ideology, but a lot of where ISIS came from were former Iraqi Guard Ba'athist leaders who were put out of power, given nothing to do.
Correct.
And so they found something to do.
Right.
And unfortunately what they're doing now is total mayhem. One of the big things that is getting discussed internationally, but not getting discussed in this country, is Iran's big issue is let the Syrians decide for themselves who will lead their country. And they say that because they clearly understand. They understand history, and what America does not seem to understand is history. And when you go in and when you remove a dictator and you do not have an established government in place to replace him, you create a vacuum. And when you create a vacuum, all types of interests and factions rush in to fill it. There's a reason that when Hosni Mubarak was removed from Egypt, that Egypt did not fall into the same chaos that we're seeing in Iraq and that we're seeing in Libya and we're seeing in Syria. It's because we removed the leader, but the government stayed in place. So what the United States has got to do is to Colonel Christopher's point, we do see every problem as a nail, and so every solution is a hammer. And all we have are F-16s, F-18s, Abrams tanks, and TOW missiles. So everything requires a military solution. It was a good idea to bring the Iranians into the debate, and because they, I believe, can be a sensible voice in this. And the only way you're going to get out of this thing without creating a bigger problem is to allow the Syrians to decide who is going to run Syria.
You know, if I can, Kelly, if I can just build on that. You know, I think it's really important to understand, you know, today we're having a conversation about ISIS. You know, 14 years ago we was having a discussion about Al-Qaeda, which is really where ISIS is born from, the remnants of the leftover faction of Al-Qaeda. And so tomorrow, who are we going to be having a conversation about? The issue becomes, let's get to the root cause of this issue. And it is these extremist factions that can grow from, you know, from exploiting, you know, one's needs. And so let's get to the root cause and say, you know, what is the issue here? ISIS is an organization that that beheads people, extort money. The reason that we're having a discussion about that particular region of Iran and Iraq and Syria is because that's where their stronghold is now. We have to, in my mind, the solution that we should consider includes a containment to a degree. It includes disrupting their operation by cutting off the head of the snake, to cut off their opportunities to gain access through to taxation, to cut off their opportunities to gain access through exploitation.
They're getting, what, $500 million in oil because they've captured the oil.
Right, but see, a big problem here is American hypocrisy, because yes, ISIS is beheading people, but so is Saudi Arabia. And the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia are just as violent and just as vile as ISIS. But it's okay because the Saudi royal family was put in power by Britain, and so they're all part of our team. So it's okay if they behead people. We don't have a problem with that. Right. But because ISIS is doing it, now all of a sudden, oh, you know, well, beheading is a bad idea. You fight an ideology with a better ideology. And people that have roofs over their heads, food in their stomachs, and see a future for themselves, they tend not to be too upset, and they tend not to get radicalized. So what we need to do is spend less money on tanks, TOW missiles, and grenades, and start feeding people, and stop being the global hegemon and going into countries and taking people's resources and leaving them with nothing, and start trying to play the game fair and let these people actually realize the benefits of their own resources on a global market. And then you might find that if you want to bomb them with water, bomb them with rice and grain, and bomb them with blankets, instead of the foolishness that the United States is engaged in.
Sometimes I think that we talk too much, and sometimes I think we get out there and I don't understand why we seem that we need to talk too much. But Senator Dianne Feinstein basically gave the blueprint of how to get into this country through visas, and it seems to me that it was counterproductive of what she was doing to basically say, okay, America, we're not prepared. Or terrorists, we're not prepared for you to stop you from coming in. Here's how you do it. You know, you go through this country, you come back over here, and because you went through one country, came to another country with a visa, we're not going to worry about you because you already made it to the other country. How productive is that? And doesn't that ultimately put us more at risk than not?
Oh, it's not productive at all. I think, you know, everybody's panicking and people have lost their whole sense of control here. What you cannot do is when a crisis comes is lose control. And which goes back to my point of we do have to trust our leadership to a point. We have elected them into office. They don't have all the answers, but they surround themselves with a cabinet and with people who they believe can have the best answers for us at this particular time. You know, I've been in some of, you know, I mean, what's been in the news lately is how much classified information is given out. I think there has to be some classified. I mean, that's the whole point. Colonel Christopher, you know, you fought in the wars. Not everyone is supposed to take the lead on the front line. There are directions in terms of war. And I think we're in a war right now. And I think we all have to listen to some voice, and we can't give out all of America's secrets. We can't lose control. And I think that we have to come back and have some censoring. Yeah, it is a crisis. And crisis means that everything is out of control. There are no rules as there used to be. But then who comes to bring us together? And that is the strongest leader in the free world, and that is the President of the United States. And ultimately, we have to surround ourselves and surround him and support him as he makes the decisions to the best of his ability. Nothing's going to always be right, but Americans are joining this war. And we have to look at why young people are so disenfranchised in America that they're going over to join extremism. So I think someone has to take the lead, and for me, it's having been in an administration that I worked very hard with and that I supported and still support, and trying to get back into the administration in a different way to be a legislator for the United States. I think at some point we have to trust our leadership and we have to come together. If we lose control, then the ideology, the fanaticism, the radicalism, ISIS wins.
So before you go, tell us exactly how to get in contact with you. How can we make sure that folks can reach out to you there in New York and across the country? Because I know you're going to be here in a couple of weeks. But how do they get in contact with you? Your Twitter account, your emails, your website, things like that.
Thank you so much. Suzan Johnson Cook for Congress.com is my website. It has all of the ways to contact me. I'm Suzan Johnson Cook. I'm on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, and then Susan with a Z. So Suzan Johnson Cook for Congress.com. We'll be coming to the DMV Tuesday, December 1st, a week from tomorrow. We'll be at the CBC Institute for a fundraiser from 6 to 8 p.m. I'd love to have anyone who's listening come and join us. Again, you can always email me at friendsofsujay@gmail.com, friendsofsujay@gmail.com. So I want to thank you so much for having me, and I wish you also the best, Colonel Christopher, and Professor, thank you so much for your insight. Both of you worked very hard sharing tonight and allowing me to be a part of this wonderful, wonderful show. Kelly, keep up the great work.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and certainly you continue to do the same. Your efforts as ambassador and leading our nation in international religious affairs was certainly exemplary, and I want to commend you. And certainly, I will be there on Tuesday to support you as well as those that I try to bring with me along with us.
Blessed Thanksgiving, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You too. Colonel Christopher, let's go to you, because America, are we losing ground? I mean, are we losing ground in this effort, or the media would have us believe that Russia and Putin has taken over, and that because they've moved in, although they're backing off of that a little bit because they got their own plane blown up. But are we losing ground?
No, I wouldn't say so at all. And just let's understand that the reason that President Putin has really become more involved is because one of Russia's planes was, as we understand it, and as we gain more information, as we understand it currently, that it was taken down by a bomb or by a missile. And so I think it's important for us to understand and get more information there. But the reason I suggest that we're not losing ground is because, again, this is not just America's fight. This is a fight for the region. This is a fight for a coalition of the willing. I want to go back and I want to emphasize every problem in the world for America is not a nail, and every solution is not a hammer. And so I want to overemphasize the importance of using every element of national power to get to a solution. And what I believe that looks like is, I do believe it's about disrupting ISIS. I do believe it's about destroying ISIS. I do believe it's about containing ISIS, but I believe it's about a coalition of the willing. And I believe that one of the ways that America can best help with that, and particularly right here in my congressional district, is through cybersecurity efforts, through intelligence and national security, national intelligence efforts, to make sure that we are able to interrupt the internet, which is one of the primary resources of ISIS, to be able to recruit, to make sure that we are, disrupting their abilities to leverage taxation and through going into villages and stealing and exploiting people through those kind of efforts. And so I don't think we're losing ground. I think that we're continuing to build, the coalition that we need to really address the issues with ISIS.
Dr. Leon, because the president, says we have a strategy. We have a strategy. We're building coalition, as Colonel Christopher says. We're doing these things. He's not sharing it. He's not talking about it. Is that to a detriment for the American public to actually understand, although we recognize that you can't share everything? Or is it something, because I remember that years ago, even with Bush and with the president when he first came in, we would say, well, we're going to be leaving Iran at June of 2011. We're going to leave Afghanistan July of 2014. We're going to do this, and this is what's going to happen, that's going to happen. We publicized that. I felt we shouldn't have done that, but we did. Now we're not publicizing, and it seems that because of the president's demeanor, he's not a boisterous or aggressive personality. He's more laid back, he's more direct, he's more subdued in some cases. Is it that demeanor that causes folks to question and criticize, not just the fact of his ethnicity and race, but or is it that there is a plan out there just that has not been codified?
I think the biggest issue is his ethnicity, and then the problem becomes his demeanor. The adage has always been, and Colonel Christopher, I know you know that was it all politics stops at the water's edge.
Yes.
This is the first in my lifetime. This is the first, maybe the Vietnam War, but it took a whole lot of time before President Johnson got criticized for Vietnam. This is the first time I've seen a president negotiating a nuclear deal, and people in Congress saying, let everybody know, no matter what he does, we're not gonna go along with it.
Exactly.
All politics was supposed to stop at the water's edge. So that's why I say his detractors feel very comfortable criticizing him internationally.
Correct.
No matter what he says.
Exactly.
No matter what.
Never happened before. Especially when you were abroad.
Exactly.
Any president who was abroad, you never criticized.
Exactly.
You waited till they got back, then you had your press conferences and talked about it.
And mainstream media does not seem to be able to find the backbone to challenge Lindsey Graham and ask him, or to challenge John McCain or what's his name from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell.
Mitch McConnell.
And say, how are you really an American? I mean, that to me is what from a congressional perspective, maybe we need to talk about bringing them up on espionage charges, because that's not what Americans are, at least American politicians are supposed to do. Then it gets exacerbated by his personality, because he won't come out and call them out for what they are.
Right. And then he gets criticized when he does.
But see, if you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, you might as well do.
That's right.
You might as well do. Because if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Right.
So, and then the final point to all of that is, the only way the plan works is if it works. It worked when he went after, not Saddam Hussein, Bin Laden. It worked when he went after Bin Laden. He kept the whole thing to himself, and then He came on TV on Sunday and said, "Hey, folks, guess what?
Exactly.
Ding dong, the witch is dead."
Right.
So,
and Bush did the same thing with Saddam Hussein. He didn't say anything until it was done, and they captured him. And
yeah, but we knew that he was chasing Saddam all over the every rabbit hole or rat hole they could find.
Yeah.
We knew that. We knew that. So this may very well be another example of his. I'll call it silent diplomacy, at least in terms of domestic policy, where he's keeping it close to the vest, and then hopefully there will be a breakthrough, and he can say, "Look, I told y'all this is how we had to play it."
Right.
Only time will tell.
Go ahead.
Kelly, this is really important for your listeners to understand, and really for the larger community, for the community at large to understand. When we talk about putting boots on the ground, when the media presents that, they're generally speaking about combat troops. Combat troops. I'm talking about the tankers and the gunners and those folks. So for every one combat soldier you put on the ground, you've got to put 3 logistics troops or combat service support troops to support them. So if you put a brigade of combat troops on the ground, you've got of 2,500 people. For every one of those people, you've got to send another 3 troops to deal with that. To deal with the logistics support of that combat operations. On top of that, as we saw in Afghanistan and Iraq, what is the desired outcome? What is our national security objective here? The will of the people. When we say the majority, I don't think a majority of Americans want to see our troops engage in yet another extended war. It's important when you consider, philosophers or military strategists, like Sun Tzu. One of the first identifiers in the destruction of a country like ours is to be engaged in long and protracted wars. So I am not, as a former combat veteran, I am not a proponent of putting our American sons and daughters into harm's way yet again. I think that there are some areas that we can focus on to support operations through a coalition, but it's important for us to understand that when we're talking about sending troops into combat, we're generally talking about combat troops, but what we always miss or what people don't understand is for every combat troop that we put on the ground, it takes 3 additional service support troops to support that operation. So before you know it, you got 10,000 troops on the ground, and so then you got to go in there and you got to deal with, the space, the footprint, and then redeploying the exit strategy. So there's a lot of things to go into combat operations.
And there's the political side of this as well, which the conservatives are using to their advantage, trying to play politics with this. And so the president says we're going to engage in ISIS and whatever that strategy is. Then they're going to say, yeah, but you said that you weren't going to support Assad. As though those things have to be mutually exclusive.
Exactly.
And they don't. So people really have to and look at the way that the politics is being played with what's happened in France. You now have people clamoring, talking about
President?
No. The technology being used. It begins with an E. I just lost the word. Anyway, you have all of these political issues that are flooding into the narrative as a result of what happened in France. They're blaming Snowden for this. They're saying that the president's plan to do away with the metadata gathering is what contributed to this, even though that had absolutely nothing to do with it.
Right, they're blaming him for a lot of stuff for what happened on someone else's soil that didn't happen on our soil. I'm going to take this caller real quick. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
The very informative program that you're having right now. I was just listening because I was getting so much information from the panel. But I would also like to say, putting boots on the ground, I was all for that until a couple of people I know were talking about that. Putting boots on the ground and destroying ISIS, if we can do it, someone's going to fill that vacuum. And how long are we going to be in that country trying to fight a war that's not winnable?
Well, that's a good question, caller, and that's what we're talking about. I appreciate you giving us a call. Thank you so much, Colonel. He makes a great point, and that's something that you talked about before, and it's also something that the Colonel that Dr. Wilmer talked about, because anytime we always go after and go after McCain, supply the rebels with arms and things like that, they turn around and come after us.
Yeah,
They turn around and come after
What's
us.
important to understand here for your listeners and Kelly for our general discussion, remember we're talking about a non-state actor. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about a nation state. And so we have to be considerate to the sovereignty and to the boundaries of these nations that we're talking about. Yes, President Bush, had the notion to say we're going to hunt them out and we're going to smoke them out wherever they are. But we do have to be considerate that these are sovereign nations that we are, in some cases have to seek permission to go in and bring troops. Some people are not welcome into that.
And real quick, because we only got about 3 minutes left, because I want to talk about that. Because whenever we go into a sovereign nation, we end up having to foot that bill. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that the American public understands that, because we have to go in and foot that bill to the tune of, for Iraq, $22 billion. And then they're talking about the deficit and how much has gone up under Obama, not counting how much it went up under Bush and how our surplus left.
And those wars weren't paid for.
We're not paid for. But then also the point we didn't touch on the refugee issue.
Right.
But the idea too is that with political asylum and things like that, we then pay them when they get here. And I don't know that the American people understand that either, because that's to the tune of like $100,000 a family, or $100,000 a person that we're paying them when they come over here for. Now, I'm not against folks coming here or anything like that, but my mom and daddy didn't get no 100 grand when they came over here. In fact, they got put to work to make sure that we made 100 grand for the man we came to work for. So I mean, those are issues that clearly America is not focused on and talking about.
But here's the word I was trying to come up with was encryption. That was the key word I was trying to get. There is no evidence that encryption technology was used in this bombing, and they need to stop trying to get that through. But the point too is that you fight an ideology with an ideology. And so you've got Syrians who need to come into this country. And we do have the way of using biodata and other types of things to be sure that terrorists aren't coming in. And so if you want to start to develop a counter narrative in Syria, start treating those Syrian refugees like human beings. Right. And that's one way you can then start to demonstrate to the people that are still there that America is actually doing something to assist them, instead of trying to convince them to step up and fight a war, and then they don't know if the United States is going to back them
up.
And as Eisenhower told us about the military-industrial complex, look who wins in this whole thing. Right. Boeing, Dow, Lockheed, Raytheon, Halliburton. That's who's winning on this thing.
Real quick, we got about 30 seconds. Caller, you still there? You still there, caller? All right. What's at stake, Colonel? What's at stake for us right now? Because we got about 30 seconds. What's at stake for us in America?
What's at stake for us is our freedom. What's at stake is for us to live and home and feel that we can be protected and we can continue to enjoy America's way of life, and focus right here in our country on creating jobs, to making sure that, particularly in the African American community, that there is fewer disparities in healthcare, and to make sure that we are focused on supporting our country when it comes to protecting us against would-be terrorists.
Dr. Wilmer, what's at stake?
Our humanity. Gil Scott-Heron said, it's winter in America. Nobody's fighting because nobody knows what to save. Save our souls. We're fighting for our humanity.
I want to thank my guest tonight, Ambassador Suzan Johnson Cook, candidate for the 13th Congressional District of New York, Dr. Wilmer Leon, former professor at Howard University and syndicated talk show and TV host, and Lieutenant Colonel, retired Warren Christopher, candidate for the 4th Congressional District in the state of Maryland, Maryland's 4th District. I want to thank them for joining us, and thank you for listening in. Our nation is at a pivotal point in our national security. Congress is playing politics while ISIS terrorists are picking off the easy targets to make an impact and deliver fear across the globe. As African Americans, we don't always speak up about national security. And maybe that's because there's so much going on the domestic front that we don't always think of the national security side. But I submit to you that in this day and age, we must diligently and always understand all values of our political, social, and economic platforms. Don't devalue one area simply because it's unfamiliar to you. My guests tonight have shared valuable insight into the workings and thinkings of terrorist groups, American international intelligence, and what we need to do, and also a historical point of view. So the insight that we've gotten tonight is something that we have to treasure and use as African Americans in this community, and understanding how we vote and who we vote for. So as always, don't sit at home during this primary season. You may regret what you get in November. Again, I want to thank my guests, Ambassador Suzan Johnson Cook, Dr. Wilmer Leon, Lieutenant Colonel Warren Christopher. Please check out these two dynamic candidates. Make sure you follow them. How can we get in touch with you, Colonel?
Sure. Go to warrenchristopherforcongress.com, and there you will find a lot of information about national security, immigration, job creation, and I look forward to engaging with you, and I look forward to being the next representative for the state of Maryland for 4th Congressional District.
Thank you, Colonel. And Dr. Wilmer, how do we get in touch with you?
Go to wilmerleon.com, wilmerleon.com. You can find me on Twitter, Dr. W. Leon at Twitter, and on Facebook, Dr. Leon's Prescription at facebook.com.
Until next week, we want to thank you once again. If it's social, economic, or political, it's Black Politics Today. Thank you again. Good night.